Revelation chapter 17 verse 16. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. In the news, from the AP, Poland to end Russian oil imports. Germany warns on gas. Germany, the EU's biggest economy and one of the most reliant on Russia's natural gas, has signed deals with several suppliers of LNG, which is shipped to neighboring European countries and then pumped in. Officials say they aim to end the use of Russian oil and coal this year and natural gas by mid-2024. It has not stopped the fears about the coming months. Germany issued an early warning Wednesday over gas supplies and called on companies and households to conserve amid concerns that Russia could cut off gas deliveries unless it is paid in rubles. Western nations have rejected that demand, arguing it would undermine sanctions over the war. Germany's gas storages are filled to about 25% capacity. The question how long the gas will last basically depends on several factors, such as consumption and weather, he said. If there is a lot of heating, then the storage facilities will be emptied. He added that Germany is prepared for a sudden stop in Russian gas supplies, but warned of considerable impacts and urged consumers to help prevent a shortage by reducing their use. We are in a situation where, I have to say this clearly, every kilowatt hour of energy saved helps, Habeck said. The secondary warning level would require companies in the gas industry to take necessary measures to regulate supply. The third means full state intervention to ensure that those who most need gas, such as hospitals and private households, receive it, Habeck said. We're not there and we don't want to go there, he said. Germany's Energy Industry Association, BDEW, supported the government's move. While there isn't a shortage yet, it's necessary for all those involved to have a clear roadmap in case of a supply interruption, Chairperson Kirsten Andreas said. And so there aren't any lackings of the existing oil and gas supplies imports that are imported from and provided by Russia to Germany and throughout the rest of Europe, but rather interruptions of these two major energy commodities due to Western and European sanctions. And CNN further expounds upon this issue. But before I play this short coverage, I would like to give all praises, blessings, glories, and honors unto Yahweh Bahashim, Yahweh Shai Bahashim, Racha Kwadash. Double honors to my elder apostles and bishop elders of Great Millstone who have taught me this truth, as well of men of like mind. Shalom wa chasad, which means peace and mercy to the elect of the nation of Israel, whom are you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native American Indians, and Israelite foreigners of the seed of our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whom are scattered here in America, which is Babylon the Great, and abroad. To you I say Shalom and Yahweh Bahashim, Yahweh Shai Ratazah. This lesson is edifying and informative.
Russia is one of the world's top producers of oil and natural gas. Energy exports are the lifeblood of the Russian economy, so much so that John McCain once said,
Russia is a gas station masquerading as a country.
And with its vast network of pipelines connecting it to its neighbours, Russia can exert significant influence outside of its borders.
My name is Noah Brenner. I'm the Eastern Hemisphere Editorial Director for Energy Intelligence. We cover all aspects of energy, as well as energy policy and geopolitics. Russia's traditional oil and gas producing areas are here in western Siberia, and then we see an array of pipeline connections moving across western Russia into eastern, central, and eventually onto western Europe.
One of those pipelines, Nord Stream 1, can deliver 55 billion cubic meters of gas to the EU every year.
Nord Stream 2 would have doubled the amount of gas that Russia was moving into Germany. Now, of course, that made Western partners, particularly the United States, nervous because they saw it as locking in a role and a demand for Russian gas in Germany, but also for Russia within the energy policy and the geopolitical sphere of Europe.
In response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Nord Stream 2 has been halted.
Und ohne diese Zertifizierung kann Nord Stream 2 ja nicht in Betrieb gehen.
But Europe isn't the only market for Russian energy.
Oil demand and gas demand in Europe generally have been thought to have peaked. And so the future for Russia and the future for Russia's energy trade is towards Asia and towards China in particular.
In Russia's far east lie another set of gas fields. They're connected to China via a pipeline called the Power of Siberia. In 2019, China's state media reported that by 2024, the pipeline would deliver 38 billion cubic meters of gas every year.
Russia has proposals on the table to build a second one, known as the Power of Siberia 2. But this alliance between Russia and China can be seen as another way that Russia is able to leverage its oil and gas supplies globally to create influence beyond what might be possible were it not this energy powerhouse.
Control over such giant energy supplies has some countries, particularly in Europe, worried about Russia's leverage.
This idea of Russia weaponizing its gas supply, say withholding gas or oil supplies, has been a key question for many in the West, but to date in history we have not seen Russia do this.
Russia supplies 40% of Europe's gas, and the alternatives are either underdeveloped green sources, phased down nuclear plants, or climate-wrecking coal. With energy revenue crucial for Russia, any loss of sales could be damaging. But as Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues and Western sanctions persist, so too does a threat of an export cutoff.
The conflict in Ukraine with Russia's invasion has created seismic shifts within the way that Europe thinks about its energy, where it gets its energy from. Europe always knew that it was dependent on Russian energy, and this was always seen as a weak point in its geopolitical and its security framework. This invasion and the rapidity and the force that Russia has employed in Ukraine has really galvanized Europe in a way to tackle this much more seriously than we've seen before.
And this is one of the reasons why the beast shall hate the whore. Because the time will come when they will realize that following America and being influenced by her philosophies would have brought them nothing and have brought them nothing so far but trouble. Briefly reading this article, Germany issued an early warning of possible natural gas shortages on Wednesday over a payments dispute with Russia that would lead to energy rationing in Europe's biggest economy, that is, Germany's. Moscow said last week that it wanted to be paid in rubles rather than US dollars or euros as per existing gas supply contracts, and threatened to cut off supplies if that didn't happen. The Kremlin's demand has been rejected by Germany and the G7 group of leading developed economies. The German government said Wednesday that the country had enough gas for now. Keep that in mind. But it urged all consumers, from companies to hospitals and households, to reduce their use as far as possible with immediate effects, even as we had read briefly in the AP News' article. There are currently no supply shortages, but rather just interruptions. Economy Minister Robert Habeck said in a statement, "Nevertheless, we must take further precautionary measures to be prepared for any escalation by Russia. German gas storage is currently filled to 25% capacity," he added. The early warning is the first of 3 alert levels set out in Germany's plan to manage gas supplies in a crisis. If the situation deteriorates, the government will declare an alarm, followed by an emergency. At that high state of alert, Regulators can ration gas to maintain supplies to protect the consumers, such as households and hospitals. Industrial users would be the first to face cuts. This means that industrial production gets lost, that supply chains get lost. Leonhard Bernbium, chief executive of German energy group E.ON, told public broadcaster ARD, according to Reuters. We are certainly talking about very heavy damages. Klaus Müller, head of Germany's energy market regulator, said in a tweet that Wednesday's alert was aimed at avoiding a deterioration in gas supplies, but said consumers should be prepared for all scenarios. The European Union depends on Russia for about 40% of its natural gas, and Germany is Moscow's biggest energy customer on the continent. EU sanctions imposed on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine include a ban on new investment in energy projects, but do not target oil and gas exports. The European Union is planning to slash consumption of Russian natural gas this year by as much as 66%. Now let us recall, even as we read earlier in this article, that the European Union depends on Russia for 40% of its natural gas, as it prepares for a complete break with its single biggest energy supplier. And this, again, will be one of the major reasons as to why the beast shall hate the whore, because they will realize that listening to and following after America was indeed and in fact a bad choice, because they will suffer greatly from this unified decision, which was and is influenced and spearheaded by America, Babylon the Great, against Russia, their single biggest energy supplier. Because remember that Germany is Moscow's biggest energy customer on the continent. And Germany has the largest economy in Europe. So once Germany begins to suffer, so will the rest of Europe, because it will cause a chain reaction. But Europe would struggle to survive for long without Russian gas. And finding alternative sources presents a huge logistical challenge. A recession would be all but assured if Putin cuts off supplies. The Netherlands, another of Russia's big energy customers in Europe, said Wednesday it would ask the public to use less natural gas in a bid to reduce its dependency on Moscow. And so all these European nations that are a part of NATO and the EU are following after the US's decision and influences to depend less on Russian natural oil and gas, which will ultimately and inevitably cause Europe to implode within itself. And so I will, Lord's willing, leave the link of and to this article in the description box of this lesson. German trade unions explain what would happen without Russian energy. Whole industries will stop operating almost instantly, the groups warned. Germany will see its major industries like steel, chemicals, and paper shut down in a matter of weeks if it's left without gas, oil, and coal from Russia, the country's top industrial unions have said. The heads of IG Metall, IGBCE, and IG BU unions held a joint press conference in Berlin on Tuesday to warn about the potential fallout of of the German government's push to cut reliance of Russian energy in response to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Exploding energy prices, but above all, a possible gas embargo, would hit energy-intensive industry, the mother of the industrial network, hard. Michael Vassilides, president of Germany's IG BCE Chemical Workers Union, pointed out. The consequences would not only be reduced work hours and job losses, but also the rapid collapse of the industrial production chains in Europe, with worldwide consequences, he added. Halting Russian gas, oil, and coal imports will put 3.4 million employees in the German construction industry at risk, as it totally relies on lime and cement, which requires a lot of energy to produce, which is majority is imported from Russia. For as we can recall, the European Union depends on Russia for 40% of its natural oil and gas energy commodities. Robert Feiger, who heads IG BCE Construction Workers Union, pointed out, the federal government must do everything in its power to ensure energy supply despite the current crisis situation, he insisted. I will conclude reading the article here as the points have been made. And so now let's reread Revelation chapter 17, verse 16. And the 10 horns is referring to the European Union. That is the 10 horns, the EU, which thou sawest upon the beast. The beast is referring to NATO. These shall hate the whore is referring to America, Babylon the Great, and shall make her desolate and naked. How? Through thermonuclear fire, because America's allies are going to turn against America and bend their bows, which are their nuclear silos, to shoot their arrows, which are their nuclear missiles, upon America to burn her up with fire and make her desolate. And shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. And this will be the conclusion of the great whore, America, Babylon the Great. Imminent and utter destruction by way of thermonuclear fire. And so referencing back to this article, which emphasizes the current situation and the results that it will yield against Germany and Europe, this is one of the reasons why the beast shall hate the whore. And not only will the current ongoing situation negatively affect Germany and as well as the rest of Europe, but it will also negatively affect the entire globe, in that it will cause severe constraints and impacts on the global food supply chain. This article is from the HuffPost, and it reads, UN Food Chief, war in Ukraine has created a catastrophe on top of a catastrophe. David Beasley, Executive Director of the UN World Food Program, told the UN Security Council the war will have a global impact beyond anything we've seen since World War II. The UN Food Chief is warning that the war in Ukraine has created a catastrophe on top of a catastrophe and will have a global impact beyond anything we've seen since World War II, because farmers from the country, which was the breadbasket of the world, are on the front lines fighting Russia, and already high food prices are skyrocketing. Also due to external financial factors such as inflation, stagflation, and shrinkflation. And shrinkflation, to recall, is when the cost of rations appreciate in price but the quantity or volume in the rations decrease. So you're paying more for food for less. I.e., you might go to the store to buy a bag of potato chips, and you may notice that you're paying more for a bag of chip that contains a lot less chips in comparison to what we've been experiencing over the past 2 years. That is inflation, stagflation, and shrinkflation. Stagflation, to recall, is the appreciation in inflation and the depreciation in the country's GDP. Okay, I'll do a financial lesson on all these different jargons that Esau uses, Lord's willing. But reading on, David Beasley, executive director of the UN World Food Program, told the UN Security Council Tuesday that his agency, which was feeding 125 million people before Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, was already beginning to cut rations because of rising food, fuel, and shipping costs for millions of families around the world. In war-torn Yemen, he said, 8 million people just had their food allotment cut to 50%, and now we're looking at going to zero rations. And all you comfortable people out here in America, Babylon the Great, you're getting ready to experience an unprecedented world, and where the Lord is going to increase famine upon this land. Because everything is like this in America. You can just, at any moment, at any time, go to the store, go to the supermarket, and pick whatever you want. At any time of the day, any time of the morning, even early hours. But all that is getting ready to get cut off. The war in Ukraine is decimating the country, turning the breadbasket of the world to breadlines for millions of its people, Beasley said. But it is also devastating countries around the world like Egypt, which is 85% dependent on Ukraine grain, and Lebanon, which was 81% dependent in 2020. Ukraine and Russia produce 30% of the global wheat supply, 20% of the global maize supply, and 75 to 80% of the sunflower seed oil. So guess what? Get ready to see bread and dairy products skyrocket in price. And this concludes the article. So now, let's get the last few scriptures and conclude the lesson. This is the book of Ezekiel. And Lord's willing, it was edifying and informative. Ezekiel chapter 5, verse 16. When I shall send upon them the evil arrows of famine, which shall be for their destruction. And so famine is coming. Hunger is coming. That the Lord is going to send over here into America, Babylon the Great, which shall be for their destruction, on which I was sent to destroy you, and I will increase the famine upon you, and will break your staff of bread. So will I send upon you famine and evil beast, and they shall berate thee, and pestilence and blood shall pass through thee, and I will bring the sword upon thee. How the Lord Yahweh has spoken it. And the point is famine. Famine is one of the plagues that the Lord will send upon this earth. And we are getting ready to see that on a global scale, when we will soon see 2 Ezra 6, verse 22 get fulfilled on a much more wider global scale. 2 Ezra 6, verse 22, and suddenly shall the sown places appear unsown. The full storehouses shall suddenly be found empty. All your farmlands, all your supermarkets, all your stores, all that is going to become completely wasted. It's going to be found empty due to famine. And people are going to start taking actions into their own hands to survive. It'll become like the road and the book of Eli out here. I Am Legend. People are going to start cannibalizing their own families, their own children, all these things are coming back. And it may sound far-fetched, but guess what? It happened in history before, and it's going to happen again. Except this time it's going to happen on a much larger and worse scale. So I pray this lesson was edifying and informative. Until the next Lord's willing, this has been another in the news edition. I say shalom to the elect.